Growing up on a farm, we were surrounded by birth from animals from the time I can remember, and I was always intrigued by that. And then I listened to my grandmother tell stories of how she assisted women on the Texas Panhandle plains having their babies, and so I was always intrigued. When I got into middle school, there was an opportunity to be like a nurse aide at our local hospital, and I always found myself going back to the women who were having babies and seeing what I could observe there. When I entered high school, my ultimate thought was I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be an obstetrician. And then I got to looking at the medical side of things, and I thought, no, they're so focused on disease and complications, and birth happens so naturally. I went into nursing school instead so I could work on the whole person, because they really stressed the psychosocial aspects of caring for people. And I loved being a nurse, but then I found myself in labor and delivery being a nurse. And I watched the interventions that happened in the hospital. There were a few, but very few, women who came in and had their babies with no medication. And those women, when they were finished having their babies, it was like they were so proud of themselves and felt so empowered. So I thought, wow, that's the way it should be, not hooked to monitors and IVs and cords from everything. Then I decided, well, I'll just be a midwife since I'm not going to be a doctor. And so I got accepted into midwifery school, and in midwifery school we were exposed to birth centers, and we had to actually write a birth center proposal. It's kind of like a thesis. And I thought, wow, this would be so great. And so my ultimate goal finishing midwifery school was to have a freestanding birth center. Midwives function in the hospital, but in a hospital you're generally confined to still some hospital rules that outside the hospital you're not quite so confined. Of course, we still have standards that we need to uphold, safety standards, and make sure women are well cared for and be on the lookout for any complications. We just are cognizant that they could happen. First job out of midwifery school was actually in a hospital, but there were also 13 nurse midwives on staff. In that practice, I probably caught at least 1,000 babies, probably more. So I felt like I got a lot of experience. And again, it was a very busy labor and delivery area, and we had many inductions, and it was very medical model, even though there were lots of midwives. But I learned things that I thought were important and things that I thought were not so important. And then when I left that job, I actually moved to Oklahoma. And again, there wasn't the opportunity for a birth center, so I went to work at the hospital there and was able to actually introduce a lot of midwifery principles. I was the first midwife at that hospital, and it was not nearly as busy a practice, even though we were pretty busy. I was letting women eat a little bit during labor, drink water so they could have something besides just ice chips, and the nurses were like, you can't do that. They don't have to have an IV. Oh yeah, they do, it's hospital policy. Well, if I could get by with it, I didn't. And I introduced intermittent monitoring there, so that they didn't have to be on the monitor the whole time. They could be up and mobile. And I was there for a little over 9 years. So since they stopped delivering babies at that hospital, I was left to do just well women care, which was fine, and I loved taking care of women, but I missed the birth aspect. And so about the same time they were closing down their OB practice at that hospital, I got word of the birth center here in Wichita Falls. And I was just up the road 45 miles, so it made the transition very easy. Even though my heart had always been to have a birth center, I hadn't had that opportunity, and now all of a sudden it was just presented to me. There was a section of the population here who really wanted that experience, but it just wasn't available to them. And so I was excited to be able to offer that experience for them.